only boiled food, not using any oils on the body. Fasting one day we already covered. Cleaning Vishnu's temple. Go to the temple and mop the floor, or wash some pots or something like that. Sing and play instruments in the temple, whether the temple's here in front of the deities in the home with the kids. This goes back to increasing the kirtan with the family in the evening. And then additionally, if possible, eating after 6 p.m. So these are all different assortments of varieties of vows that one can take.
Meaning don't eat after 6 p.m.
What's that?
Don't eat after 6 p.m.
Yes.
Don'ts.
Yes, things that not to do. Yeah. But there's a very important point to remember, and this is stressed by Bhaktivinoda Thakur in his commentary on the Damodarastika prayers. He says the observance of Kartik Vrata is one of the most important things for the Vaishnava to follow. So how we observe it, we have some leeway there. But observing it is one of the most important things, according to Bhaktivinoda Thakur, that we follow. So, just see if I did we're offering. So just a little summary here. Just remembering to worship the Lord during this month, to perform different austerities, to find a way to increase our japa, to increase our kirtan, to, even if we can't do all kinds of elaborate fasting, find one food we can give up for the month, and by doing this type of thing, adding to our daily program, singing the Damodarastika. This is a very important prayer to be sung during the month of Kartik. We get that little deity, or even if we just have a picture of Yasoda Damodar, we put it on our altar and we sing the Damodar prayer at night. This is a very essential part of it as well, So these handful of things, these are very important to look at as far as what can I do for the month of Kartik, what activities are able to be followed. Now, there's also the flip side of the coin. Well, I don't know, maybe I just won't do it this year. So what's the big deal? Well, Kartik Mahatmya kind of points out what the big deal is. If one neglects to perform Kartik Vrata, all of their pious merits amassed in the past will become burned to ashes. Their study of the Vedas will become futile. Their performance of japa, charity, and other austerity will become fruitless. A person who does not follow a vow in this month that is dear to the Lord Damodar finds themselves outside of religious principles. Their next birth will not be beneficial. I'm making that sound prettier than it says. If a householder does not follow some vow during Kartik, their pious and charitable deeds do them no good. Such deeds will become like the screams of a person in hell. They will fall upon deaf ears. O King of Brahmanas, what good will study of the Vedas or the Puranas do for a person who does not follow Kartik Vrata? My dear Narada, if one does not follow a Kartik Vrata, 7 bursts of pious deeds will become useless to them. So, while these are some very heavy statements from Kartik Mahatmya, they are indicative to us the importance of something Prabhupada very easily said in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Every household should follow. How we follow, we have a little leeway there. Everyone should do something. Even if it's just I put a picture of Radha Damodar and I offer arti and sing it each night. That's something, So they're very heavy statements, but it's not so hard to do something. And because we are Brahminical by our very application of devotional service to our lives, this means we need to do some austerity. And this is a very simple austerity we can do. So it's just a few points on the glories of Kartik, on the importance of Kartik, and on the results of following Kartik. I just thought I'd share some of this. Yasoda Prabhu?
I've heard that it's recommended that we do not share with others even one's spouse, what the vrata is that one's following. Is that indicated in the Hari Bhakti
Yes,
Vilas? Or?
yes, it's very clearly indicated that when one takes a vow, one should not broadcast that vow. As far as not sharing it even with one's spouse or whatever, I don't know how far that is extended, but it does note that one should not broadcast the observance of a vow. Hey guys, I figured it out. So here's what I'm doing this month. Isn't that great? Because that's the culmination of it. Yeah, well, I am doing something real special here. No, because the mood of humility is essential in performing any type of vow. If one performs a vow with pride, then the results aren't there. Krishna accepts any type of devotional service except that which is prideful. Krishna will accept devotional service that's angry. Krishna will accept devotional service that's, so many descriptions are given in the Nectar Devotion. We don't find pride being one of them. If we're proudly executing our service, Krishna's not going to be so satisfied. So yes, it is correct. We decide this. Now, in the case of a spouse, I would think it's something we would have to discuss because there's joint activities involved. Cooking, eating, what's the activity of the day going to be like that. So I would think that, discussing it, has to be there in some degree.
Especially if you give up a certain food.
Right.
Yeah.
Especially if, for instance, one spouse is doing all the cooking. Oh no, thank you, I'm not eating. That's not likely to increase. What was it here? Peacefulness in the The vow will not have a mood of peacefulness to it. I just spent all day cooking for you. No, but I'm not eating.
It's my birthday.
You might have told me.
No, you won't say to me because you keep a secret. Next morning I again cook. I'm not eating. After 1 month I will give you divorce paper.
Because if you do it without consultation, you may find that not only for that month, for many months, you may do your own arrangements for Krishna.
That's right.
So, but yes, the idea of keeping such a vow to oneself, keeping it in the family, as we say.
Prabhu, you will lose weight. Think about it.
Yeah.
I might suggest this prata to both of us.
Any other questions?
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
One of the 4 things in the beginning was over-dependence on the mercy of another.
Yeah.
Can you explain what that means?
Depending too much on my circumstance in life or in devotional service on someone else. Let's say, just as a mundane example, I was talking earlier about the great composers. Many of these great composers, their livelihood was based upon the generosity, the patronage, thank you. Patronage of someone else. To the point to where that was their sole, this gift from a king or a benefactor or whatever. If our life is structured in that way, then that's very detrimental. So during the month of Kartik, reducing our dependence upon the support, not necessarily financial, but just exclusively maintaining ourselves by another's mercy. I'm not explaining that very well.
I don't know, it sounds clear, it just sounds difficult in this day and age, right? Because if you do talk financial, I don't even know what that would be because we depend upon our jobs.
Well, I wouldn't think that, from my understanding, I wouldn't think that something like a job, because we're giving something, we're getting something in return.
Yeah.
Mercy of others, you're, existing at the grace of someone else. I don't see much.
I remembered something that I heard that one of the things that's not recommended for the devotees to think that anyone other than Krishna is my maintainer or my shelter.
Yes.
So, if we are too dependent on someone, like a patronage that you mentioned, it could be that we forget that actually Krishna is the one who's supplying me the necessities of my life, and I start thinking that this person is the one who's maintaining.
Yeah, and in connection also to the job, so also Maharaj said that if, for example, your workplace become a hell and you're not making any arrangements, and you think that only the job will support you, then it's also unhealthy because you believe just that person and that job, will pay your bills. You have to make the arrangement and believe that Krishna will arrange for you something so you can facilitate your bhakti.
This is the importance of Vaishnava Sangha. The question is put out, and not some clarity is there, so then by discussing, it can become clear from different angles. I think that's an essential point that Yasoda-dulal is making, is that mercy of others, but maybe nothing more than the mental understanding that ultimately Krishna's benefacting me. Krishna is the one taking care of me. My wife and I, for years, when we lived in New York, of course now the overhead in New York, I can't even imagine how many people do it, but when we lived in New York, our overhead was X amount, and that's what I was able to pull together. And then when we moved to South Florida, Fort Myers Beach, it was half of that, but that's what the income brought us. So in that sense, I'm not depending on the mercy of others. I'm seeing that Krishna is supplying what I need to get by. Krishna will take care of us. And that's been our guideline throughout our entire marriage, is that whatever we need, Krishna is going to supply it. So to the point Yasoda-dulal was making, as long as we're seeing that Krishna is the one taking care of us, and we're not depending on others, or at least in our own mind thinking that it's their mercy supporting us, then I think that would fulfill that restriction, so to speak. Yeah. Yes, Prabhu.
Does it, I'm thinking from another perspective.
Yes, please.
Does it actually mean that we should not just be dependent on mercy and take our own serious effort on doing things or practicing bhakti?
That's also a good point too, from the spiritual perspective, to be accountable for our own devotional life, which would fit in accordance with the ideas structured in this presentation here on Kartik Vrata, is that we're doing things that we're taking responsibility for our own spiritual advancement, so to speak. Yeah, my husband chants nice rounds and goes to the temple, that's good. Or as a kid, well, my parents are devotees, I don't really have to worry about much, or, whatever the case is, So, or like in my case, my wife's always listening to the Bhagavatam classes I mentioned, so she'll hear, I don't have to hear. So if we think like that, then that's depending on the mercy of that person, because as a family, collectively our devotional benefits work together. So if I'm thinking, well, I don't have to put much in the equation, that you're right, that's an example of that as well. Yes. Thank you.
But after that, then I have another question. What is our hope without devotees' mercy?
None. That's the easiest question I've ever been asked. What is our hope without the mercy of Vaishnavas? Nothing. Without Sangha, without association, without kata with each other, we have no hope. Because Prabhupada says very clearly in the 5th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam in one purport, he says, if you think that you can survive in Krishna consciousness without associating with ISKCON, you are living in a hallucination. It simply cannot be done. So does that mean that we have to live in the temple? No, what it means is we have to associate with devotees, with Prabhupada's followers, with his society. Prabhupada, where was that? I was listening. It was a lecture I was listening to. Prabhupada was giving from the 2nd canto. I forget the chapter now. And he said that it's not that, I have a disagreement with the devotees. They will not give me this. I want to have this. I can't have that. I'm leaving. He said, we cannot leave. Even we don't get what we want, we must stay in the association with devotees. Now, back in those days, of course, it meant strictly living in the temple. And that's all we had was ashram life. I remember when one senior devotee in the community I grew up in moved out and got his own apartment. It was like, God, the world's coming to an end. And then he got a job and started supporting himself. Oh my God, what's he doing? And then he gave a monthly check to the temple. Oh, that's not so bad. So the point being that the concept has to be taken into place, not necessarily the exact circumstance. In the 1970s, all we did was live in the temples. We didn't have outside communities. In the 2020s almost, we all live outside. Hardly anybody lives in the ashram. So the circumstances change, but the principle of associating with devotees, manners such as this, and going to the temple for the festivals, whatever the situation is the essential factor we have to embrace. So yeah, without Vaishnavas, we got nothing. And this is the prayer of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Without your mercy, I have no hope at all. You had another one?
Yeah, slightly off topic. I know we know that you keep traveling with Indrananda Swami Maharaj and other group of devotees. Could you share something that keeps you going? Keep traveling, going to different places, sharing. For example, if you're going to other places like here, you're sharing your knowledge, you're sharing your bhakti with other devotees. But could you share an example of that? What inspires you to go out, and what is one experience or a few experiences that you had? For example, going to Himalayas, and so what was that you even wanted to go there?
I'll give you a very good example of that. It happened to me last year. Badahari and I were traveling with Indradumna Swami, and we're doing our tour of Russia. And we were in Ukraine. We were in Ukraine in a city called Kharkiv. And they were having their Rath Yatra. And we're sitting on the stage, Badahari and I, and we're doing kirtan. And there's this huge crowd of devotees and non-devotees alike, engaging also. And after the kirtan was finished, I said to Badahari, I said, how is this possible? I said, you and I, we're just average white boys from America. You're from the West Coast, I'm from the Midwest. But here we are, sitting on some stage in some foreign country, leading hundreds of people in the chanting of the holy names. I said, it's only Prabhupada's mercy that he went out and did that same thing, that we're able to do it. He said, yeah. He said, it's really an amazing realization when we realize what Prabhupada did and take that as a inspiration for our turning and doing the same. Now, depending on the stage of life, not everybody can do that. You know, when I was a younger householder and I had 3 children living at home and numerous responsibilities more than I may have now, my opportunity to go and travel like I do wasn't there. But the children have all grown, you know, the responsibilities are a little bit less, so some opportunities are there. So taking that inspiration from Prabhupada, how he left everything and went and came to America, you know. And look who I travel with. Badahari, Indradumna Swami. I mean, Indradumna Swami he's like the Energizer bunny. You know, he never stops going, you know. And when I see that he can go on and on and on and on and on, month after month, day after day, you know, it's like, okay, I can do 6 weeks of this, you know. And the other side of it is that it's encouraging to me when I come to a place and I see so many people taking up Krishna consciousness. Because, you know, I live in Alachua, I have a little circle there, and it's just a finite number of devotees, and, you know, you see who goes to the temple and who doesn't, and that's pretty much it. But when you travel to places, you know, whether it's New Jersey or Siberia or Ukraine or, you know, whatever, and you see so many people taking up so many different aspects of Krishna consciousness, that's enlivening. That's just, you know, wow, look what Prabhupada did. You know, and it all just because Prabhupada made that effort to come to New York City and sit down under that tree and chant. That's how all of this has taken place. And, you know, living in the New York area or in the Bhakti Center, whatever, we're able to maybe draw a little closer analogy of that because we're so close to that spot. But, you know, it's all over the world. It's everywhere. I mean, there's practically no place you can go where you're not going to find devotees engaged in chanting. You know, even my friend Keshi Hunta, he had this desire to take Prabhupada to the last continent he had not been on, Antarctica. So he went on a cruise with another devotee with an expedition of you know, scientists or whatever, to the Antarctica with a Prabhupada Murti. And when they got there, they did Guru Puja there. Yeah, so, why do they do that? Because now they can say Prabhupada's taking Krishna consciousness to every continent. So this goes on all because Prabhupada made that effort. So that's the inspiration. Just sort of problem.
If I can make a comment and then a question.
Yeah.
So the comment, when I'm from my earliest days in Krishna consciousness, I would rebel when I heard that you had to do Ekadashi, you had to do this vrata, and you had to do that. And I'd be like, why do I have to do it? Right? Like, why does it please Krishna if I'm suffering? Right? So I could never understand that.
Yeah.
I think over the years, I've stopped rebelling against Ekadashi for sure. I've embraced it. I eat only once a day and, things like that. But, when you were speaking, my realization was that, the reason for performing the austerity is to reduce our attachment to and devotion to the material aspects of our life and focus more on Krishna. And because, I give the analogy for tailwind. Like when the plane's flying and there's a stiff tailwind, right? We were coming back from Hawaii, there were tailwinds of 110 miles per hour. Our flight got in 1.5 hours early, right? Because the tailwind was so strong that zoop, it just reached, right? When we were going that way, there were headwinds of 85 miles an hour and the flight was half an hour longer than what it was supposed to be. And so in the month of Kartik, the mercy of Radharani and Damodar is like the tailwinds. It's propelling us forward. And so the purpose of doing the austerity is not like, let me suffer and Krishna will look at me and say, ha, I'm enjoying my sweets and he's giving up sweets. It's not that. It's more to detach ourselves from what holds us moored in this consciousness and frees us up to be in that consciousness, in the spiritual consciousness. Would you say that's
Excellent point.
an accurate way of looking at it?
Yeah. These different benedictions that we find in performing Krishna consciousness are just like that. That example the tailwind said, the little extra push that moves us forward in Krishna consciousness. Many of the spiritual masters, because I do initiation fires for many different gurus and their disciples, the statement is to chant 16 rounds minimum. And disciples say, I promise to chant 16 rounds and maybe more, or sometimes say 25 on Kasi, whatever, something extra. That extra isn't required, but that extra has a, push for it, a spiritual push. So yeah, your point's very well made. I like that example. I'm probably going to steal it.
Came because of your talk.
Anyone else?
I also wanted to add something because I was thinking about the over-dependency that the
Please.
husband or wife or friendship or working relationship. I think so it's more in connection when you start compromising your spiritual principles for gaining something material to sustain your comforts, or when you are attached to something, certain lifestyle or whatever it is, and you compromise in this for that, that's called over-dependency. But like, for example, you go in regularly to work, but your life is in such a way that you can actually practice your Krishna consciousness, nothing obstructing, you're not overly dependent, go to work, You're just doing your duty, but when you come home, you have all the opportunities to practice your Krishna consciousness. Like, for example, sometimes devotee marry non-devotee, and although sometimes they have to, sometimes for the sake they have to cook meat, they're compromising because they dependent on, but with some time they have to be determination to keep the principles going and not continue doing that forever, So I just brought a small example.
That's a very good point. It reminds me of an exchange I had when I was doing the question and answer tent in Woodstock one year. There was a lady in the audience, and she raised her hand because, it's all just questions. And she said, you're describing the importance of not eating meat and describing the different types of people that are impacted by it. I'm a vegetarian, but my son, my husband and I are vegetarian, but my son is not, and I cook meat for him. Am I getting a reaction for that? And I said, shall I give you a polite answer or the honest answer? She said, please, the honest answer. I said, yes. I said, you're cooking the meat, you're serving the meat, therefore you're getting the reaction for killing the animal. I said, I apologize, but that's the truth. So I felt a little awkward, went on to the next question like that, and then she got up and there was somebody sitting next to her, got up and left, and I thought, I got to catch up with this person and kind of move forward with this conversation. So later the next session, because I had a break and then another session, I saw her walk by and I'm like, and then I finally caught her. And this person was with her, that she was a younger person. And I came to find out this was the son. And I said, I wanted to apologize. I felt awkward for putting you on the spot like that. I said, but, she said, no, please. You shouldn't apologize. She said, because after you gave that answer, my son came to me and he said, Mom, I don't want you to suffer anymore. I'll quit eating meat also.
He got the point. Oh my God.
So, yes, that dependence upon the mercy of another, right? This was a situation where it just wasn't in the best interest, but it was happening. And somehow or another it was able to be stopped. So, yeah, that's also a very good understanding explanation of that point. Yeah, I like that.
Could you share some Prabhupada Katha with us? Your personal pastimes?
Well, I'm no Shuri Kirti by any means. I'm not as charming as him, neither do I have as much association as he did. But I did have some association with Srila Prabhupada. We doing okay? Yeah, we're fine. Yeah. 1975. We figured out. Yeah, 1975. Prabhupada was in Chicago, and the way it worked, I was in the St. Louis temple, and we had a very small temple. Prabhupada was never coming there. And so whenever Prabhupada came very close, we just shut the temple down and went. We took our Gornitai deities, we put them in a throne, and we had a little case with all their clothing, and we went to whatever temple Prabhupada was, in this case it was Chicago, and we put Nitai Gauranataraj on the altar, and boom, we were all there. Matter of fact, Chaturatma Maharaj was our GBC, and he heard that we had done this, and we were all here. He was quite concerned because there would be no Sunday feast program. Not that the Sunday feast in St. Louis was anything huge, but it was our outreach. So he went to Srila Prabhupada concerned about this, that we were going to have to pack up and go back to St. Louis. So he said to Srila Prabhupada that, the devotees have left the temple there. They've all come here to see you, but the temple's closed and there's no Sunday feast program there. There's no way to receive guests or anything. Prabhupada thought for a moment. He said, and where are the deities? He said, oh, they brought the deities here. They're on the altar downstairs. He said, the deities are here? Then the temple is here. They can stay.
Wow.
So that became our standard. So at any rate, I was the Sankirtan leader, and my job was to get everybody out on the streets. So I organized the whole thing. Okay, I got to work with the local Sankirtan, got everybody out. And then I went over to Prabhupada's apartment and sat, just waited, because I knew I'd get a little association there. Prabhupada was staying in the apartment of one devotee I came to know later was a friend of mine that I didn't know was his apartment at the time. And I would just sit in the dining room and just chant, waiting for some opportunity. Prabhupada's servant at the time was Upendra, and his secretary was Brahmananda. And I believe, I can't remember if it was Harikesh or Prajumna at that time. I think it was Harikesh that was Prabhupada's translator. So Upendra had taken a liking to me and kind of gave some facility for me. So I was sitting there, and Prabhupada walked out of his bedroom, went out of his sitting room one day to go to the bathroom, and he stopped and he saw me. He looked at me and he said to Upendra, so who's this? And Upendra said, this is your disciple Chaturatma. He said to me, you can do something for me? Yes, sure. you can fix something in my room? I said, yes, sure. So he turned up and he said, show him. So Prabhupada had, many of you know this little orange or pink bag he would carry with him everywhere, like a little suitcase. It was a very small little briefcase kind of thing. And in there would be keys to different almiras and rooms around the world and different important papers. And wherever he would go, he would put that somewhere and lock it. And in this apartment he was staying in, there was no place to lock it. Prabhupada was quite concerned. And what it had was inset into the wall was a chest of drawers. It wasn't like sitting outside. It was flush with the wall. They were built into the wall. And so he wanted me to put a lock and a hasp on one bottom drawer, drill into the woodwork and into the drawer and all like that. I don't know how the residents felt about it later. And so he could lock that. So I went to the hardware store and got the stuff. So Prabhupada was, yes, this is very nice, thank you. So it was like some insignificant personal service to Prabhupada I got to do, but it was very important to me.
Where was this?
This was in Chicago in 1975.
Oh.
And so that same time period, Sunanda was cooking for Prabhupada. And I was there, and so I said, I need your help. Can you come in and help? No, not Sunanda, no. Apurva. Apurva was cooking. Prabhu, I need your help. Can you come in? I said, sure. So grate this, cut this, whatever. Okay, you get it all. Okay, take this into Prabhupada now. Yeah, carry Prabhupada's plate into him. So Prabhupada had this habit when he said his lunchtime, he always did, and his little choki, his little table was there, and he'd sit behind it, and he'd bring the plate in and leave, because Prabhupada mostly, almost exclusively ate by himself. And so I took Prabhupada's plate and I set it down, offered my obeisances and left, and then there was another bowl of something to go in. I took that in and Prabhupada looked up at me, he said, more chapatis. That was the one instruction I got, more chapatis. So I ran and got more chapatis and brought them like that. When I had taken the plate in originally, it was a silver, what we call a mint julep cup, and that's what the doll was in. And so I got to take that into him. Now, they had asked at the temple that morning for volunteers. The first morning Prabhupada was there. We need volunteers for cleaning Prabhupada's room. Yeah. So it was the St. Louis boys got the job. Me and 4 other devotees, 3 other devotees. I think it was 4 of us total. So Prabhupada would come out of the apartment for his morning walk, go on his morning walk. From his morning walk, go straight to the temple for Didi Darshan and class, Guru Puja and class. And during the morning walk, we would clean the apartment and then go over for the Didi Darshan. So it was a 2nd floor apartment. It was one of those kind of apartment buildings, like a quadplex, and it had the big glass windows. So you could see Prabhupada come out of his room and come down the stairs and then out the door. And every morning for 4 days, I put a garland on Prabhupada's neck. And then we'd offer our obeisances. Now, one night it had been raining a bit. It was, it had rained during the night. And that morning it wasn't really raining, but it's just a little drizzly. And there were some puddles here and there. But it was a generally overcast, wet, funky day. So I put the garland and we went to offer obeisances. And Prabhupada said, no. He said, don't do it in the water, because you'll become sick and then your service to Krishna will be hampered. And I was like so impressed. Here's the spiritual master of the universe, suitable to be worshipped by every living entity, and he's telling us, no, don't bow down in the water, you'll get sick, and you won't be able to serve Krishna. It was just such an amazing realization to me of how merciful Prabhupada was, and how much he looked out for the well-being of his disciples, not, yes, I'm, like that. It wasn't, never a hint of that. So, this would go on like this for 4 or 5 days. I'd get the devotees off, I'd walk over. I was learning 3rd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. I had my little note cards. It was before any of these things, so we had everything written out on a 3x5 index card. Like that. And I still have those note cards, by the way. Yeah, I found them in my drawer there. It's like, oh, this is cool. These are from my brahmachari days. It's all that's left from my brahmachari days. But at any rate, so in the evening, Prabhupada would have darshan. And then, after the darshan, everybody would leave and like that. So after the darshan one evening, everybody was getting up and leaving, and a Pendra kind of looked at me and went, kind of gave me that signal. So I kind of drifted to the back of the crowd of devotees that were leaving. And then all that was left in the room was Srila Prabhupada, Upendra, Brahmananda, Harikesh, and myself. And they brought in a TV, set it up on the stand there. There had been a news reporter from the local news station by earlier that day and did a live interview with Prabhupada, and it was being broadcast on the news that evening. And Prabhupada was going to watch it, so I got to sit up and do that with him. So I got this experience of watching TV with Srila Prabhupada. And so the first thing on the news was the local teachers were on strike. There were some protest or something, and Brahmananda had been a teacher, in high school, and so he was explaining to Srila Prabhupada, this news program is about the teachers here. They're on strike because, and Prabhupada cut him off, said, because they are nonsense and do not know the real meaning of teaching. And then there were other things, and Prabhupada made a little comment or a joke, and then the article came on with Prabhupada, and he looked at it, very nice. All right, you may take rest now. Yeah, so I got that nice opportunity. 1976, Prabhupada was in Detroit. We'd done the same thing, taking the deities up when we were there in Detroit. And Prabhupada's secretary was Pusta Krishna, and the servant was Harisari. I realized that I'm not getting direct access to Prabhupada. But if I serve these two, then I'll have access through the access. So I became their servant. I did their laundry. I got their meals together. I gave Pusta Krishna's massages and things like that. And so I had a little access to whatever was going on. Prabhupada would give a darshan with that famous recording of him speaking with the two Catholic priests and the old guys railing on Prabhupada about not feeding the poor and whatever. And they were there on the veranda of the Detroit mansion. We had not gone out in the yard because it had rained that day and everybody was crowded there. There's actually a picture of it. You can see me sitting there with a little shaved head. And so they finished the conversation. The priest had to get up and go, and they took their respectful leave of Prabhupada. And as they were leaving, Prabhupada turned to Harisari and said, did they get prasadam? They must have prasadam. Go and see that they get prasadam. So Harisari got up and ran off, and then Prabhupada addressed all of us. He said, anyone that comes to the temple must get prasadam. That was the same year he sent out the letter to all the temples that there must be prasadam on hand at any one time to feed 10 or 15 men. He said the temple is Radharani's place, and no one comes to Radharani's house without being, given prasadam. So, like that. Now, Prabhupada was gave initiations, of course, and I remember very clearly, there's a godbrother of mine who lives in Alachua now. His name's Ramia. So Prabhupada's sitting on the Vyasa-san, and the devotees are coming forward, and the temple president's introducing this so-and-so, and Prabhupada hands the beads, your name is. So he took the beads, he went to hand, and your name is, and now Ramia at the time had a full head of hair. He worked for IBM. He was a big corporate executive for IBM. Prabhupada, and he pulled his hand back. He said to the temple, why is he not shaved up? Prabhupada, so the temple president said, well, Prabhupada, he has a very important position in a local corporation. He works for IBM. Prabhupada said, oh, well, that's okay. And he said, your name is... During that time, at the St. Louis Temple, we were known as being a little peculiar. We were an enthusiastic group of brahmacharis that was led by a temple president that was eccentric, to be polite. And but he had us devoted to the lotus feet of Lord Nityananda. We were known as that Nityananda temple. Nitai Pada and the Juice Book, which is a whole collection of quotes about the importance of taking shelter of Nityananda's lotus feet and things like this. We had a reputation. And so at that time in ISKCON's history, laminating was a big deal. Everybody had little laminated whatevers. Well, I had this laminated badge. It was about this big. And it was a picture of Nityananda's feet. And below it, I had used press-on letters, and it said, are you ready for millions of moons? With a question mark. and I had it laminated and hanging off my bead bag, you know. So I was in front of Prabhupada for Guru Puja one day, dancing and dancing and dancing. I didn't get this story told to me until years later by my godbrother Bhima, who's in Mumbai and the head of the BBT down there. And he said he was watching, and I'm dancing, my bead bags around my neck and this thing's there. He said he saw Prabhupada, it caught his eye. And he says he saw Prabhupada lean forward a bit and squint, and then shake his head and smile very nicely. And sit back. I didn't hear that story until many, many, many years later, after we had all been ridiculed for being fanatics and weirdos. During that time, Harisari, as I mentioned, was Prabhupada's secretary, a servant, and he would bring Prabhupada's shoes into the temple and put them right under the Vyasa-san, so that, you can't just leave Prabhupada's shoes sitting outside. So I was sitting on this side of the Vyasa, and Harisari was over there, and I saw the shoes there, and I was kind of looking at them, thinking, oh, it'd be nice to hold Prabhupada's shoes when he puts his feet on. And I looked up, and Harisari caught my eye. He saw me looking at the shoes. And he was thinking, I was thinking I'll steal them or something. He gave me one of those, not on your life. No. So Prabhupada finished his lecture, got up and he walked to the front, offered his obeisances to Gaurnitai, Radha Kunja Vihari Jagannath, and came back to Gaurnitai's altar and started to walk down. In the meantime, I had taken the shoes and gone over to the door, and I'm on my knees at the door, just outside the temple room, holding Prabhupada's shoes. Now these were just little house slippers. They didn't have a back or anything, you just slipped your foot into them. So I held them in such a way that it was mandatory for Prabhupada to put his feet in there, to run his feet over my fingertips. I had figured it out, So he had to like that, and then I just kind of rolled over on the side and got out of Prabhupada's way, and I was like, Prabhu. So
and Prabhupada probably knew it, but he was mercifully allowing.
From there, Prabhupada went to New York. This was the 10th anniversary of ISKCON. 10 years. Anybody who was anybody was in New York at that time. We had 55th Street. It was the first Rath Yatra down 5th Avenue. And they didn't give us half of 5th Avenue like they did now. They shut the whole street down. From 59th all the way to Washington Square Park. We had the whole thing. We had 3 big carts, then we had 3 Radha Damodar buses and 20 vans, and it was a parade. And so we had the main parade marshal, but then we had some assistant parade marshals. And I was one of the assistant parade marshals. And my job was to make sure that the buses and the vans stayed lined up and made the lights and, so it didn't get splayed out. So as an assistant parade marshal, I knew that at Herald Square, or 34th, Prabhupada was going to show up in his limousine and get on Subhadra's cart. So I made sure that by 36th Street, all my drivers knew what to do. They didn't need me. And I ran up ahead and I climbed up on Subhadra's cart and sat down next to Prabhupada's Vyasa-san. Sure enough, Prabhupada's limousine pulled up there, got out, the devotees went wild. It was pandemonium in the streets. And then the sannyasis and senior devotees all formed a chain, and Prabhupada walked to Subhadra's cart. They had some stairs they had put there, and he walked up the stairs, and he sat down on the Vyasa-san, and I'm sitting right next to him, picked up the peacock fan. I fanned him from 34th Street all the way down to Washington Square Park. Now, there's video footage of this famous scene, Prabhupada sitting there, and you see this fan going up and down. You don't see who's holding it. But it was me.
What a service.
So we got down to, you see, Washington Square Park. There's 4th, 5th, and 6th would be the north border, right? Yeah. So 6th and then 7th. So at 7th, Subhadra's cart stopped. And it just was not going anywhere. So Prabhupada called Tamal Krishna Maharaj, who was sitting there, and he said, go and find out what's going on. So Goswami got down and ran off in the distance. And then he came back some minutes later, and he got up, and because I was right there, I could hear him. He leaned over to Prabhupada. He said, Prabhupada, the problem is that so many people have showed up in the park for the festival, they have no place to put the carts. And Prabhupada leaned back and smiled very big, shook his head. This was very nice news to him. And then 1977, Now, this was the last time I'd seen Prabhupada there in 76. He was vibrant, full of energy. He was preaching. Kartik, 1977, Prabhupada arrived in Vrindavan and on what would be his departure bed. And he got out of the car. I was the noon pujari for Krishna Balaram. 11 o'clock we'd make the offering, 12 o'clock would be the RT, and 1 o'clock the deities would go to bed. So we had made the offering, and Prabhupada's vehicle arrived, his entourage. And I had leaned, those of you that are familiar with Krishna Balaram, you know where there's Gurnitar's altar, and then there's that side door there. And so I had stepped outside that side door and kind of climbed up on the side of the moldings, and also I was hanging on the edge of the building there on those little decorative pieces. And I could see, because none of the other buildings that are currently there were there at that time, including that big wall. So they pulled Prabhupada's vehicle up, and they got Prabhupada out and put him into, and Prabhupada had diminished physically so much to such a shocking state that it literally shocked me. I lost my grip and fell off my perch there. And then they brought Prabhupada in, and I got to go in one time to do kirtan for him. Hamsaduta was leading kirtan that afternoon, and the kirtan was going on. And then Goswami called me out. He said, take this vial of Prabhupada's urine and take it to the Kaviraj. He's at the gate waiting, like that. So then I took this to the Kaviraj. And then I got to be there another time to do kirtan for Prabhupada like that. Sadly for me, I got really sick, and I got malaria and freaked out and went back to America. And I was in New York not 2 weeks, and Prabhupada departed. So I didn't have any foresight at that time. I didn't have any realization. I was so overwhelmed with being deathly sick that I left, and I otherwise could have been there for that opportunity. But then when the Samadhi was constructed and the big brass murti of Prabhupada was established, we did the Abhishek. Gorkeshava Prabhu was the head priest for that, and I was his right hand. And we had this big platform in the area of the Krishna Balaram temple now where they put the class speaker seat. And this huge brass murti up there, and everyone's bathing. At that time, coincidentally, of course, when you have an Abhishek, you've got buckets going underneath. The buckets have to be changed. Well, this was a huge murti, as you've seen the size, many of you. And there was so many buckets. And the devotee responsible for doing all that changing was a devotee by the name of Kadamba Kanana Adhikari. And he came out after the end of this, because it was a big platform. He was literally under there moving things. And he was literally dripping in honey and yogurt and milk. And I said, Kadamba Kanana, you're completely covered in everything. He smiled. He said, yes, and it's all right off of Prabhupada's body. He said, I knew that when I volunteered for this service. I told him that story years later when I met him, He said, yes, I remember that. So at any rate, we finished the Abhishek, and then we had to carry the brass deity of Prabhupada from there into the Samadhi and place it on the altar. No small task. So there were 10 men. We had ropes wrapped around Prabhupada's body in such a way 2 were coming out this way and 2 were going that way, and men carrying them. So we got through the Krishna Balaram temple and out the door, and it was all much more open than it is now. And as we got to that little platform before you go up that first set of stairs there in front of Prabhupada's Samadhi, a couple of devotees started crying out, I'm losing my grip, we have to set Prabhupada down. No, we can't set him down here, what are we going to do? Brahmananda was walking alongside of us, and Brahmananda at that time was still quite sizable. Let's just leave it at that. He got down on all fours, and we rested that murti on Brahmananda's back. And he held him while we resettled our grip, and then he got up and he said, now I know why Krishna gave me this big body. It's my favorite Brahmananda story. So then we got Prabhupada in. I don't know how we managed to do it. To this day, I still can't figure out how we managed to physically carry that Murti Prabhupada through that door and up onto the altar, but we did. And we got him in there, and then we did the Pranpatishta ceremony for the deity. It was Lokanath Swami, Gopal Krishna Goswami, Narayan Maharaj, what was that head Pujari's name, the French one? I can't remember his name now. He was the head Pujari at Krishna Balaram, myself and Gaur Keshava, with the 6 of us in there. And we did this whole ceremony for installing the Pratishtha, for making Prabhupada's presence there. It was really sweet. And that's that. Not so many pastimes with Prabhupada, but ones that are very dear to me, ones that I really hold close to my heart. Jai. What do we got?
Thank you for sharing. Thank you for guys for sharing.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to come here and put up with sleepy kids in your lap so you can try.